Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Many of us struggle with sales, whether it's from confidence, comfort, and just not wanting to be salesy. We want to help our customers. We know we can, but we complicate the process. This podcast is designed to help professionals like you improve at sales through process, practice, frameworks, and thinking differently about what you already know. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and I'm here with the founder of Catalyst Sale, Mike Simmons. Hello, Mike.
Hey, Jody.
I always feel like I should blow a trumpet or something when you enter the room or on the show. Like, it's a big deal. Mike Simmons is here.
Prefer rose petals, kind of like rose petals when I'm walking into places.
Rose.
That doesn't translate well in an audio podcast, does it?
That's what I was gonna say, because rose petals, they're so soft they don't even crunch when you walk on them. So it just wouldn't work.
So going forward, I want everybody to envision that when we start these podcasts, Jody throws rose petals up in the air.
All right. I don't know how well it works because I'm here in Washington State and Mike is in Arizona. I would just make a mess I would have to clean up.
Yeah. Or Wolfie'd go and start eating some rose petals, huh?
Oh, he probably would. I have a 1-year-old Labrador retriever who I'm sure would love to eat those rose petals.
So, Jody, what are we talking about today?
Well, not my dog. We're going to talk about customer interactions, specifically the first customer interaction. What should that look like?
Awesome. It is. This is one of those conversations that's near and dear to my heart, primarily because we run into a number of instances where people look at that first customer interaction and think of it primarily from the perspective of their business. And they think, hey, the way that I'm going to be able to provide value to the customers, I'm just going to say a lot of stuff. And I think that's a mistake, to just go in and interact with the customer and right out of the gate say a lot of stuff. The first interaction with the customer should entail some questions. And these are questions that could be gathered from either public sources or private sources. So public sources might be the information that you get in your CRM that shows what people have touched and how people have interacted with your platform or with your service before. That might be some public information. Private information would be the questions you get to ask them directly. So for me, the first interaction with any customer there should be some portion of discovery.
When you said you shouldn't just go in and talk a whole bunch, I think that's a trap we could fall into easy, because we want to get as much information out about ourselves, about the organization, about the product. That's so easy to just walk into the room or have the first phone call and never turn to the customer and find out more. And so you said discovery. Talk more about that. What is involved in discovery?
Yeah, so for me, discovery is all about asking questions. And these are not the 20 questions that people will see in a qualification gauntlet. Like, what's your budget? Who's the decision maker? How many people do you have inside your organization? I'm not talking about that kind of discovery. I mean, any of those kind of things we should be able to figure out through some of those public pieces of information, at least who the decision maker is by knowing people in our ideal customer profile and finding those folks who have those roles inside a given organization. Discovery about who the people are. What do they care about? Why do they do the work that they do? Like, who is Jody Mayberry? I know Jody is a St. Louis Blues fan. He's got a number of different podcasts that he does work on. He's got a background as a park ranger, worked in finance, experience in marketing. Like, who is this person? Why do they do the work that they do? Why did they decide to get into podcasting? Why did they decide to get into cybersecurity? Why did they decide to get into learning and development? What are they trying to accomplish? Why are we talking today? What brought them here? Once we know those pieces of information, I know that's a lot of questions. It might seem like it takes a lot of time. And we've had Dan Tyre on talking about building rapport, and a lot of people will focus on how's the weather, or lately, and I had somebody contact me the other day. The first thing out of his mouth was, first he goes, where are you based? Well, if you look at my LinkedIn profile, you know where I'm based. So strike one. The second one was, when I said where I was based, which is out here in Phoenix, the response was, oh, wow, how are you dealing with that? Is everything okay? How are you dealing with all the COVID stuff? And I know the person was trying to be empathetic and or I guess sympathetic to the fact that Phoenix is all over the news related to its ability, Arizona's ability to manage the pandemic. But really, he didn't have any context. I'm not in the middle of the city. I'm not in an area where there's a huge hotspot. I live in the suburbs. I could, there's so many different bad scenarios that could come up. I could have had a family member who just died yesterday, or I could be on the other side saying, hey, this is all a hoax. Like there's so much risk in asking that kind of question, even though it seems like that's the question we should be asking now. I would just get back to who are they? Why do they do what they do? And what are they trying to accomplish? And if you know those three answers, then you can deliver information that you have in the context of what's important to the customer, which is one of the guiding principles we have at Catalyst Sale. Deliver your solution in the context of what's important to the customer. And in this case, the solution that you'd be delivering would be information. And if I just start spewing information right out of the gate, the likelihood that I'm going to deliver the right information is probably pretty low.
You talked about finding out more about the person that you're in the room with. You also said, what are they trying to accomplish? But I'm curious about why you want to find out more about the person and not some of the other things related to the sale. What comes from finding out more about the person you're with?
They're either going to influence the decision or make the decision. There's a reason why we're having the discussion. So if they're going to influence the decision and they're not the person who's making the decision, I'd like to know a little bit about them so that they actually like working with me and realize that I'm a human being and not somebody who's just trying to pitch a bunch of stuff. I'm using this as a way to differentiate myself from others in the marketplace and not just trying to be like everybody else who just starts pitching. If they're the decision maker, I want to understand what's important to them as an individual. So even though they're buying on behalf, well, it could be different. So some folks out there, you're in a B2C, business to individual consumer environment. You might be selling houses. You might be selling boats. You might be selling RVs. You might be selling Big Macs. But in that environment, then they're buying on behalf of themselves. And we've talked about this in previous episodes about the difference between B2C and then B2B. B2B, they're buying on behalf of others. But understand what's important to them, who they are, why they care, will help me build a bigger story around how that will actually, what are they going to be looking at when we start talking about how it will impact their organization. And we'll get to the organization stuff next. But first, I want to know more about them.
All right, good. So when we lay that base, you feel comfortable knowing about them. Where does it go from there? And are you comfortable having that be the entire first interaction, just finding out who you're with?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm working in an environment where my sales cycles are 6 to 12 to 18 months, absolutely. If I'm working in an environment where I'm required to close 6 deals an hour and I have to do one every 10 minutes, probably not. So so it just depends on what I'm delivering and what the market is and what my role is. But I want to get a bit of information from them, and then so that it doesn't turn into an interrogation. And many times I'll say that just so that this doesn't turn into an interrogation. It depends on when in the conversation I'll bring that up. But what I'll do is I'll just ask them after they answer those questions. If they haven't asked any questions of me, I might say, so do you have any questions for me? Or I might say, what questions do you have for me? Depending on how engaged they are. If they're extremely direct, I might say, what questions? If they're a little bit more laid back, I might give them a little bit of room to see whether or not they have questions, depending on the kind of role that they're in. But I give them an opportunity to ask some questions. And the questions they ask will help me get a better sense for how engaged are they in this conversation.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so now you get to know them. How does that help you, whether it's in this conversation or following up? How does knowing them better help you with the sale you're trying to make?
Yeah, so I can always refer back to some of these things that come up in the first conversation in future discussions with them. Like if I know that they're a St. Louis Blues fan, we can talk a bit about hockey, especially when the Islanders are playing the Blues. If I know that that they've got a puppy around the house, we can kind of commiserate around what's happened when We've had puppies in the house and the challenges that those were on. So now I've got things to talk with them about that go beyond the business relationship. It's still that personal relationship that we're building. I do need to transition things though and start to gather more information about the company that they work in. So the who, what, why, where, when, and how from a company perspective, many of these things I should be able to get from an About Us page or recent press releases or information that they're putting in the market. What I'll then transition to is I'll share things that I know about their organization, and I'll use that to figure out where do they fit? How does this thing that we're working on align with the things that are important to the organization? I'm trying to demonstrate two things. One, that I've done my homework. I've done some research on the organization. I'm not asking them to do a job. And then the other thing that I'm doing is I'm trying to figure out, are there things that I missed in that research or that discovery that I did without them?
Oh, that's good. And I know if this is something it's not a one-time sale, if it's going to be an ongoing relationship, this first interaction is so important to get to know the person, because hopefully it's somebody you're going to be working with long-term.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Look at our first interaction, Mike. And now years later, here we are.
It's amazing that we still enjoy hanging out with each other, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So what else would you want us to know about that first interaction with the new customer?
I think the other thing, although there are going to be some, and we've talked about this in the context of call planning, knowing, who's going to be in the room, what are their objectives, what are my objectives, what are our desired next steps. If I know all of these things, then the shape, the square that I've got that represents the call can hold water, and I'm working on a solid foundation. And we'll include a link to the call planning discussion so that people can go through that review. And all of these are in the Tactical Sales Podcast playlist that we've got on Spotify. I think the other thing that's important to know as we go through this is, let's say that you go through this conversation, you ask a couple of questions, and the first answer, all the answers are one-word answers. So, hey, Jody, how you doing? Fine. What are you working on right now? Nothing. Anything specific that you could use some help with? Well, we're talking about your product. Like, if that's the responses that we're getting from people, then read the room and iterate. Don't make it a very painful thing where you feel like you've got to go through all of these questions to build rapport if they absolutely do not want to build rapport with you. If you're getting that piece, that kind of feedback, one of the best questions you can ask is, hey, what do you want to accomplish on today's call? Or what's the best thing that if we accomplish one thing in this conversation, what is it, in order for us to say that this was a successful discussion? There's so many different iterations of that question. What we're doing is we're shifting things back. If they're not going to engage, we're getting things back toward what's important for them so that we can execute. And this could lead into, now you've got to go through and do a demo and be prepared. And for those who've worked with me and have heard me talk about this before, I'm not a big fan of getting into demo or capabilities discussions in the first conversation, because I don't have enough context around what's important to the customer to do so. However, if we're coming into an instance where that's clearly what they're looking for, just like we've talked about it before, make it easy for your customers to do business with you. Be in that position where you can iterate. Ideally, you're going to get more information in an initial discovery call, but if you've got to shift to delivering a demo or getting into capabilities, be prepared to do that. I think another thing that's important to think about is, where did the person come from? So let's say the person is from an inbound inquiry where they've already gone through and they've done a lot of research. They may not be interested in all of the early stage type stuff. And in that case, again, be prepared to get into capabilities and go into your demo discussion. Have a couple of questions to ask in context to keep the engagement up, but know your operating environment, know what you're working with, and adapt to that operating environment. Don't just say so beholden to the plan that you make it hard for people to do work with you. There's the Ben Franklin quote, a failure to plan is a plan to fail. Well, have your plan in place, but then there's the follow-up to that, which is the Mike Tyson one, which is everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. Sometimes those plans have to be adjusted.
Have you ever been punched in the face, Mike?
I've been punched in the face many times, Jody.
None of them by me, in case you're wondering. None by me.
I actually had a time where I woke up one morning and I raccooned. I had 2 black eyes. We won't talk about that. We talked about mistakes in a previous podcast. We don't need to get into that mistake.
Yeah, that's true. We're on to another topic. Well, I think this has been a good conversation, Mike. That one is always something it's easy to struggle with your first interaction because you don't know the person real well yet. And it's so easy to fall into the trap about talking about yourself or the product or just doing all of the talking when Mike has shown us it should go the other way, because if you're going to serve them, if you're going to help them, you need to know who they are.
You got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Use them appropriately. And I want to thank Justin Welsh for suggesting this topic. In a Twitter stream I had mentioned, I'd asked if there were some topics that people aren't talking about enough. And this is one of the ones that he had mentioned, which is discovery. And maybe one of these days we get into more detail around how do you actually deliver a demo? Like, what's the way to deliver a demo? We've talked about this a long time ago around rush to demo, but I think we could revisit that and talk about some general best practices there on a future episode.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike. If we have a question we want to send in or a topic we think you should discuss, how do we get in touch?
Go to catalystsale.com. and it'll be really clear on that page, catalystsale.com. You can go to the live chat, and then there's also email that's linked there, but catalystsale.com is the place to start.
Okay, thank you so much for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.